afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the City of Bellingham City Council committee sessions. Our first committee this afternoon is Planning, chaired by Jack Weiss.
Thank you, Gene. This afternoon we have one item before us, and before I start, on our committee is Terry Borneman and Dan Hamill. The item is the consideration of amendments to the Samish Neighborhood Plan and Bellingham Municipal Code to create Areas 1A in the Samish neighborhood with a commercial land use designation and a commercial planning or a commercial planned zoning designation. Two council meetings ago, we had a public hearing on that, and we have brought it back for a work session for us to develop a recommendation for the council this evening. What I'll do at this point is turn it over to Kathy Bell and let her give us an introduction or another introduction to this issue, and we can go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. On May 14th, the City Council held a public hearing to consider the amendments to the Sandwich Neighborhood and the Bellingham Municipal Code. And the proposal is to create a new sub-area 1A, which is shown on the map above in the hashed area in the center of the map. It is a 1-acre parcel that is located west of Ashley Avenue between the intersection of Consolidation or Maple Street and Byron Avenue. The Planning Commission considered this request at a hearing on March 19th. The Planning Commission's findings, in fact, and recommendation are included as an exhibit to the attached ordinance. The Planning Commission recommended approval of the request, and that approval is to amend the Samish Neighborhood Plan and the BMC to create a new sub-area 1A. The zoning for Area 1A would be changed from its existing zoning designation of commercial auto to commercial planned, and they further recommended that residential uses be permitted as an outright use. In other words, they would not have to be in conjunction with another permitted commercial use. The draft ordinance that incorporates the Planning Commission's recommendation is included in the packet on pages 50 to 64. And again, this ordinance does support the Planning Commission's recommendation to the City Council. Staff has not received any additional information in response to this proposal since the May 14th public hearing. Staff requests that the committee forward a recommendation to the Council of the Whole to support the Planning Commission's recommendation and approve the ordinance by taking first and second reading of the ordinance this evening. And as a reminder, if first and second reading is taken this evening, third and final should be withheld until such time the Planning Department has an opportunity to schedule third and final reading of all ordinances that are associated with the comp plan amendment process. And I have
Kathy,
nothing.
what month is that scheduled for? Or Greg?
This Greg Ockett, Planning Department. This is the last of the amendments for this year. So if we get a first and second reading tonight, either at your next meeting or the following meeting, we would have third and final for all three of the proposed amendments.
Okay, thank you.
So if you have any questions.
Dan?
So referencing a letter from AVT Consulting on May 28th, page 2 under neighborhood character, it's in reference to neighborhood character. It says that any residential development project will be subject to design review criteria which will ensure visual compatibility and consistent scale and mass with surrounding development. I'm wondering what those design review criteria are and how is that enforced when the project is constructed?
The design review is required for any multifamily dwellings that consist of a proposal of 3 units or more. And there are both site planning design guidelines as well as building design guidelines. Some of the considerations that we look at are compatibility and transition to abutting uses. If you have a single family, or if you have a predominantly single family zone that goes into a higher intensity multifamily zone, then we look at building massing and scaling of how to interface those two. We look at neighborhood character for building designs. We look at how the vehicle is treated in this proposal. Is it all access off the front street? Is it, tucked under? Does the topography allow for that? There's a whole range of design standards that we do. It is a type 2 process, as any development on this site would be, because it's zone planned. And therefore, there would be notification sent to people within 500 feet, Mayor's Neighborhood Advisory Commission, and of the alike, and any other interested parties.
And how are those criteria enforced then after the project is underway?
Through the building permit process. So we make sure that any building permit applications are consistent, and we ensure that there is a certain steps through the building process, that they're incorporating the appropriate attributes that are part of the design review. And the planning department, when administering those design review conditions, will have a final look during building permit, which is called the occupancy. And so we make sure that those are all met. We don't usually get into, in the design review aspect, we don't get into uses. That would be more under the plan permit. So we would have multiple permits, multiple components of a permit in this case that we would be able to enforce upon.
Thank you.
Kathy, could you refresh us with some of the primary comments that happen out of the public hearing and what staff responses are to those?
Yes. Some of the issues that were presented had to do with neighborhood character, traffic, parking, noise, trash, social issues, loss of habitat, and along with that is conservation easement. Parts of the neighborhood character, some of the concerns that were being raised is that the adjacent neighborhood is predominantly becoming college rentals. Single-family homes are being converted into college rentals. And we responded to this in the staff report by saying the zoning in the vicinity is residential multi. It is true that most of the development, at least immediately to the east of the site, while zone multifamily, is developed with single-family residences, as well as those south of Byron Avenue. You can see north of Consolidation in its form in Area 19 and a portion of Area 17 that there are multifamily apartment buildings there. And we believe that any form that would occur on this site most likely would be in the apartment housing form, and that has not been the issue of the concerns that we've raised. It's property management of those individual single-family residents by being that are rented to people other than the family definition. Traffic. Traffic was a lesser concern in this one, but it was raised, and there was a traffic analysis that was presented by the applicant that demonstrated that the existing circulation system does have the capacity to support development on this site under the context that the zoning would allow, and would not bring any intersection to a level that would require mitigation. Parking, noise, and trash predominantly come back to the original issue of neighborhood character, and that is a lot of the issues that come with the high rental population. And staff responded to that those are mostly social issues and not necessarily a component of zoning. While there are some of those that we do enforce upon, it certainly is not issues that should detract certain zonings to occur on site. The opportunity should still be there, and we have not been receiving those complaints about the other multifamily areas in the neighborhood. Loss of habitat and conservation easement. Lincoln Street is located on the east of this property, and it actually runs along the northern, bisects it along the northern portion. And our critical area ordinance will ensure that preservation of that critical area as well as the buffer is maintained. And development will not impact that, and if it does, then there will be appropriate mitigation to occur. One of the things specifically that was brought up by one of the public comments, as you can see on Ashley Street, where it looks like a straight line with a whole bunch of tick marks. That is a drainage that flows directly into Lincoln Creek, and we responded that because that is an off-site attribute and is actually a stormwater facility that the City of Bellingham, and located within the right-of-way, the City of Bellingham would not impose a conservation easement over that portion, nor would that be an obligation of the property owner to develop their own property. But certainly, as necessary, we would impose a requirement to put a conservation easement on the actual critical areas as defined by our ordinance. And I believe that covers most of the comments.
Thanks, Kathy. Dan?
I want to go back to this letter again from ABT Consulting, May 28th, under parking. Parking is often a concern for property owners near proposed development sites. In this instance, the subject property is uniquely situated to benefit from existing public parking infrastructure in the area. The property is immediately adjacent to the Western Washington University Park and Ride along Lincoln. I'm trying to understand what the intent here is. That's not saying that parking infrastructure that Western maintains will be associated with this project, does it? Or is there some type of overlap?
No, I think in the applicant is here that you can specifically address that. I think in part what that's trying to say is that at least from a transit perspective, that there will be less need for parking for those using transit because they're within walking distance of that. And clearly that is one of the reasons we did support this. Or one of the factors that went into the Planning Commission's recommendation to support the proposal. Parking will be required to be provided on site. That will not preclude anybody who is either visiting and or living in development on this site, or whether it's a commercial use, from using the public rights-of-way for parking. So that is currently an allowed use on the street in this location.
Thank you.
Michael?
I want to actually follow up on both the points that Mr. Hamill raised. Let's go ahead and start with the parking. Right now, there's a soft shoulder there that's being used as public parking, and that soft shoulder would be improved with a curb and a gutter. But in terms of parking capacity, it wouldn't change. And there appears to be some indication that that area is already overparked in a certain extent. And you just said it yourself that that on-street parking is a public resource available to anyone to park on, if you're a member of the public. So, I mean, you referred to earlier that these are social issues, not necessarily part of zoning, but they're genuine issues that the city has to deal with. Maybe it's separate from this zoning decision, but what do we do about overparking, spillover parking from entirely permitted development that provides all the required on-site parking, and we still get spillover? What does the city do about that, and how do we plan with that in mind?
Some of the information that we presented last time, and this was after discussion with other planning staff as well as public works staff, were the benefits of on-street parking. And we talked about how it can be traffic calming, parking can become available on a rotating basis. Pedestrians feel safer when they've got a car between them and, the travel way. So we actually don't discourage parking on site. Part of the management and what we're finding in a lot of apartment complexes is that the developers are actually over-parking the site. And when I mean over-parking, that means providing parking in addition to what our code would require. And which sometimes we get into the discussion of here we're trying to create less for the automobile, but yet many of the people or the developers who are developing multifamily want to create more parking. And so we often get into these discussions of, well, how much parking do you really need, especially when you have available on-street parking?
Yeah, I guess I not against you, but I kind of want to push back in general against the idea that transit and alternative transportation will reduce our parking requirements. I rode my bike today. My car is still parked in a parking space somewhere else. And so the fact that there's a transit center next door is going to be great for people in the area. They really can leave their car at home, and that's the issue. They're leaving their car at home. I don't think there's a reason to knock against this development. I just think it's a problem that we have, and I don't think zoning solves it. The second issue had to do with design review. Ironically, if it's single family, there's no design review. There's only design review if they build under multifamily. But I want to know, what is the stated justifying purpose of the multifamily design review? Because we can't hold them to certain outcomes unless they're the stated intent of those regulations. For example, design review, we can't, I don't know, criticize them for their color choices, for example. It doesn't fit in the justification for it. For the multifamily design review standards, what is the stated purpose? What do we actually regulate?
We regulate both building design and site planning. So how the buildings fit on the site, how it's oriented to the public street, how the automobile is taken care of, what the landscaping requirements are. That's from a site planning component. From the building component, we are looking at privacy between units. We're looking at privacy, meaning if you have multiple buildings on a site, making sure that all bedroom windows don't look into each other's bedroom windows. We look at how accessible their usable space is. We're looking at massing, we're looking at bulking, we're looking at neighborhood character, we're looking at roof designs, we're looking at all various components of those.
So help me understand, what sort of bulking or roof design would fail design review?
A lot of it is in the neighborhood character context.
Okay, and so the applicant refers to this as the existing multifamily character of the area. Yet, as you pointed out, to the north and east, there's single-family homes. To the south and west, there's a whole bunch of apartment buildings. When it comes in with a bulky, funny roof design, what will staff compare that to decide whether or not it violates design review or not? How will that actually be applied?
The first thing we do is we ask the applicants to define whether or not there is a well-established neighborhood character, and that's one of the design review criteria that we look at. And if in the opinion of staff during review, we find that there either A, is or isn't a well-defined character, we'll determine then whether or not they need to comply with those. So for example, in areas where there are very well-established older single-family homes that have very steep roof pitches, have a definitely more of a vertical window design than, you know, the typical horizontal, we're going to look at neighborhood character and see if it's very well defined. And if it is, we're going to ask for similar design characteristics.
So in this neighborhood, where there is a diversity from really kind of plain apartment buildings to cute little single-family homes, it seems like there is no yardstick. And so how can the design review standards be applied vigorously if there's no yardstick?
There are a lot of performance standards, so there's requirements and there's guidelines of how to achieve those requirements. And there are a lot of pictures that we follow as well in our design guidelines. A lot of it is at the discretion of the director as to whether or not they meet and fit the design guidelines.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy. I'm going to turn it over to committee member Terry.
Yeah, when that multifamily design guideline went into effect, one of the reasons was a push by neighborhoods at the time. We were seeing a whole lot of vanilla boxes with straight walls, no overhangs, cut back to the cheapest possible way to build. And you would see them in the dorms that were being, or the housing off campus in a number of neighborhoods. We ended up going to a lot of places up to Canada, a lot of other places, looking at what some of the possibilities of good-looking multifamily housing was. And after that, with the design standards, yeah, some of them are still, are clunky, but now you see variations in roof lines, variations in bump outs, with porches, with overhangs as opposed to those, those buildings that were built with no overhangs. And so, there were elements put in place that are pretty standard even, and then it takes it farther of looking at the neighborhood. But those were put in place so that we don't have that straight everything that was built for a while, and to provide that. So just a little bit of background on where those came from and why, because there were some god-awful ugly things being built. Not that there isn't still, but they're still better than with what was happening there for a while.
Okay, we have 35 seconds on our agenda item. So, any other questions, or can we formulate a motion?
On this one, I will move approval.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion to move approval of the ordinance establishing this amendment? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll carry that tonight. One last question I had is, given the fact that we have multifamily on the east side of this particular application, but in fact a lot of single family has been built in there, is there a review process where we actually look at the zoning and find out whether or not that zoning should stay multi, or should we change that zoning to something that is more reflective of what actually has been built? And I'm looking at that primarily because of the University Ridge application, and whether or not we should be more proactive so that situation doesn't occur in the future. I mean, do we have a process of doing sort of like proactive rezoning?
We don't have a formal process. We have in some of the older neighborhoods of the city, as you recall, Jack, we've gone back in after some time and changed the zoning to be more reflective of the actual development pattern. So while we don't have a regular process, there certainly is precedent for doing just that.
Mayor?
Oh, hi.
Yes.
Well, when we had the Puget neighborhood student housing project come forward, that is a discussion that I had with our former planning director, which is to do some kind of a review to see to try to keep the development consistent with what was going on in the neighborhoods. And I don't know if that got passed on to Jack or to Jack too.
Oh, my
Goodness. Yeah, I know. Greg
Sorry,
or
Greg.
Rick. But it would be an interesting conversation to have, because we have places that are zoned multifamily, and yet the development that's occurred are single family. The other side of that coin was we have places that are designed multifamily. Do we want single families developing housing in the multifamily area? So I think it's a good policy conversation for the council to have, and maybe give us a little bit more direction. But I think when you get left with one lot in a neighborhood that's going to not be consistent with everything else that's developed, we need to deal with that. And yet looking for infill within our within our city limits and in our urban villages, we might want to be proactive on what we're developing within the urban villages too. So,
Okay, we'll bring that up in another committee meeting
Okay.
as a policy discussion.
Okay.
So end of committee.